Day had not said a single word in 12 years of life. Not when he was born, not when he took his first steps, and not even when his little sister Nari fell down the stairs and broke her arm. The doctors called it selective mutism, but his parents knew better. Their son was not choosing to stay quiet. Something deeper was keeping his voice locked away. His mother Soo-jin would sit with him every night, reading stories from old Korean tales about brave warriors and wise dragons. She would pause at the end of each sentence, hoping to hear even a whisper from her son. His father Minho tried a different approach, showing Dae how machines worked and asking him questions about gears and circuits. But the boy only pointed and nodded, his dark eyes full of thoughts that had no way out. The family lived in New Seoul, a massive city that stretched across the old Korean peninsula and out into the Yellow Sea on floating platforms. Tall buildings reached toward the clouds, connected by bridges that sparkled with light. Flying cars moved between the towers like schools of silver fish. It was the most advanced city on Earth, but all its technology could not solve the mystery of one silent boy. Nari was 9 years old and had become her brother's voice to the world. She could read his expressions like words on a page. When Dae tilted his head slightly to the left, it meant he was curious. When his shoulders dropped just a little, he was sad. When his eyes widened and he looked directly at someone, he was trying to say something important. Dae wants to know if we can visit the Sky Gardens today, Nari would tell their parents at breakfast. How do you know that? Minho would ask with a smile. He gets that look when he wants to see the dragons flying around the towers, she would explain. The dragons were not real dragons, of course. They were just holographic displays that the city used for entertainment. Beautiful creatures made of light that danced between the buildings every evening. Dae loved to watch them from the apartment balcony, and sometimes Nari thought she saw him moving his lips as if he was trying to talk to them. School was difficult for Dae. The other children tried to be kind, but they eventually stopped trying to include him in their games. How do you play with someone who never responds? His teachers used special tablets that let him type his answers, but even then, he wrote very little. Just enough to show he understood the lessons. Mrs. Park, his homeroom teacher, worried about him. She had taught for 20 years and had never met a child quite like Dae. He was clearly intelligent, perhaps more so than most of his classmates. His test scores were excellent, but there was something about him that seemed to be waiting for something, like a radio trying to tune into a signal that was just out of reach. He watches the sky a lot, she told his parents during a conference, more than the other children. Sometimes I catch him staring up through the classroom windows with such intensity, as if he's listening for something. Soo-jin nodded. She had noticed the same thing at home. Dae would stand on their balcony for hours, looking up at the stars that were barely visible through the city's glow. His face would have the strangest expression, peaceful but also yearning. The family had tried everything. Speech therapists, psychologists, even traditional healers who claimed they could unlock blocked voices with ancient techniques. Some doctors suggested that Dae might have a rare condition that affected his brain's language centers. Others thought trauma might be the cause, though nothing bad had ever happened to him. One doctor on Mars had been particularly puzzling. Dr. Chen specialized in unusual neurological cases and had examined hundreds of children from across the solar system. After running countless tests on Dae, he had pulled his parents aside. "Your son's brain shows activity patterns I've never seen before," he had said quietly. "The areas that control speech are perfectly normal, but there's something else. Additional neural pathways that don't match any known human brain structure. It's as if part of his mind is trying to connect to something that isn't there." The words had frightened Soo-jin and Minho, but they also gave them hope. If Dae's silence had a physical cause, maybe someday they could find a cure. Years passed, and Dae grew from a quiet child into a quiet teenager. He learned to communicate through gestures and expressions that his family understood perfectly. He helped his father with engineering projects, showing a natural understanding of how complex systems worked. He assisted his mother with her research into human cultures, seeming to grasp the connections between different societies without needing explanations. But still, he did not speak. Nari worried about what would happen when they grew up. Would Dae ever have friends of his own? Would he be able to work, to travel, to have a normal life? She had become so used to being his translator that she sometimes forgot other people couldn't read his expressions the way she could. "You'll talk someday," she would tell him when they sat together, watching the holographic dragons dance between the city towers. I know you will. You have important things to say, I can tell. Day would smile at her then, one of his rare, genuine smiles that made his whole face light up. In those moments, Nari was sure she was right. Her brother had a voice waiting to be born. She just hoped she would be there to hear it when it finally came. The morning everything changed started like any other. Day walked to school with Nari, listening to her chatter about her mathematics test and her friend's birthday party. The city hummed around them with its usual energy. Flying vehicles moved overhead in orderly patterns. Digital advertisements painted the sides of buildings with moving colors. People hurried along the walkways, talking into their communication devices or reading news on floating displays. But as they reached the school grounds, something made Day stop walking. Nari continued for several steps before realizing her brother was no longer beside her. She turned to find him standing perfectly still, his head tilted back, staring at the morning sky with an expression she had never seen before. "Day?" she called softly. "What is it?" For the first time in her memory, her brother did not respond to her voice at all. He seemed to be listening to something she could not hear, waiting for something she could not see. His lips moved slightly as if he was trying to form words that would not come. High above them, the morning sky began to shimmer like water disturbed by an unseen hand. And in that shimmer, something vast and impossible began to take shape. Something that would change not just Day's life, but the entire future of humanity among the stars. The sky above New Seoul began to change in ways that made no sense. What had started as a gentle shimmer grew into waves of light that rippled across the morning air like water. People on the street stopped walking and pointed upward, their voices rising in confusion and wonder. Nari grabbed her brother's arm, but Dai did not move. He stood frozen in place, his eyes locked on the dancing lights above them. His mouth was slightly open and she could see his lips forming silent words that she could not understand. "Day, we need to go inside," she whispered, but her brother seemed unable to hear her. Then the dragons appeared. They came through the shimmering air like living jewels, their bodies made of what looked like crystal and starlight. They were nothing like the holographic dragons that danced around the city buildings for entertainment. These creatures were real, solid and beautiful in a way that made Nari's heart race with excitement and fear. The smallest dragon was no bigger than a car, while the largest cast shadows over entire city blocks. They moved through the air without wings, floating and spinning as if gravity meant nothing to them. Their crystalline skin caught the morning sunlight and threw it back in patterns of blue and silver and gold. All around the schoolyard, children and teachers came outside to stare at the impossible sight. Some people screamed. Others stood in shocked silence. A few tried to take pictures with their devices, but the images came out blurred and strange, as if the dragons existed in more dimensions than cameras could capture. Emergency sirens began to wail across the city. News broadcasts interrupted regular programs to show the same scene happening in cities around the world. Dragons were appearing everywhere, hovering in the sky above London and Tokyo and New York, watching humanity with eyes like distant stars. But Day saw only one dragon. The smallest of them all had floated down until it hung in the air just a few meters away from where he stood. Its body was transparent blue crystal that pulsed with inner light. When it looked at him, Day felt something he had never experienced before. A voice spoke inside his mind. "Hello, little brother," the voice said without words. "I have been waiting for you to grow strong enough to hear me." Day's lips moved, and for the first time in 12 years, sound came out. "Who are you?" Nari gasped and stumbled backward. Her brother had spoken. After all these years of silence, Day had finally found his voice. But he was talking to a dragon that should not exist. "I am Hanul," the dragon replied inside Day's thoughts. "And you are the bridge we have searched for across many lifetimes." The word Hanul meant sky in the old Korean language. He understood this without being told, just as he understood that this creature was older than mountains and sadder than winter rain. "Bridge to what?" Day asked aloud, his voice rusty from years of silence but growing stronger with each word. "To hope," Hanul answered. "To the salvation of both our peoples." Around them, chaos was spreading through the city. Military aircraft were scrambling into the sky, though they kept their distance from the dragons. Government officials were making urgent announcements on every communication channel. Parents were calling schools to check on their children. But in the small space between Day and Hanul, everything was calm and quiet. The dragon's presence in his mind felt like coming home after a long journey. "Why me?" Day whispered. Images flowed from Hanul into Day's consciousness. He saw a galaxy filled with stars and worlds that burned with unnatural fire. He saw creatures made of pure energy consuming everything in their path, devouring planets and civilizations like a hungry beast. He saw the dragons fleeing through space, refugees from their own kind who had become something terrible. "We are the last of our original people," Hanul explained. "The others changed themselves into beings of pure thought and energy. But the change went wrong. They became hungry things that eat entire worlds to feed their endless need. We have been running from them for 3,000 of your years." Day saw flashes of the dragon's long exile. They had watched civilizations rise and fall while hiding in the empty spaces between stars. They had searched countless worlds for a species that might be able to help them. Most races they found were too different, their minds unable to connect with dragon consciousness. Others were too similar to their own people, carrying the same risk of becoming corrupted by power. "But humans are different," Hanul continued. "Your minds can touch ours without losing themselves. You are individuals in a way we never learned to be. This makes you strong where we are weak." "I don't understand," Day said, though part of him was beginning to. "You have been connected to me since you were born," the dragon explained. "That is why you could not speak to others. Part of your mind was already learning to speak with mine, but the connection was incomplete. You needed to grow older and stronger before we could meet properly." Nari had been listening to her brother's side of the conversation with growing amazement. To her it looked like Day was talking to empty air, but she could see the dragon floating nearby, and she could tell from her brother's expressions that something incredible was happening. "Day," she said carefully, "are you really talking to that dragon?" Day turned to look at his sister, and she saw something new in his eyes. They were still the same dark brown she had always known, but now they held depths that seemed to reflect starlight. "Yes," he said simply. "And Nari, there are others like me, children around the world who have been quiet all their lives because they were waiting for this moment. We're not broken or sick. We're bridges between humans and dragons. Bridges to what?" Before Day could answer, Hanul's presence in his mind became urgent and afraid. The dragon was receiving communications from its companions around the world, and the news was terrible. "They have found us," Hanul said. "The hungry ones, the devourers. They followed our trail across the galaxy. They will be here in 3 days. Day felt the dragon's ancient fear wash through him. These creatures that had consumed entire civilizations were coming to Earth. And when they arrived, they would not stop until they had devoured every living thing on the planet, unless the bridges between human and dragon could find a way to stop them. Within hours of the dragons appearing over Earth, everything changed. Military forces surrounded every major city where the crystalline beings hovered. Scientists worked frantically to understand what was happening. World leaders held emergency meetings that lasted through the night. But most importantly, children around the globe began to speak for the first time in their lives. In Tokyo, 8-year-old Yuki looked up at a dragon with silver wings and said her first words about quantum mathematics. In Cairo, 12-year-old Hakim explained complex energy patterns to amazed doctors. In London, 10-year-old Emma described the structure of multiple dimensions as if she had been studying them her whole life. Day found himself at the center of a storm he never wanted. Government officials arrived at his school within the hour, followed by scientists, reporters, and military personnel. They all wanted to understand how a boy who had never spoken could suddenly communicate with alien beings. His parents rushed to the school as soon as they heard the news. Sujin ran through the crowded hallways until she found Day sitting calmly in the principal's office, with Nari beside him and Hanul floating just outside the window. "My son," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You can talk." "I always could, Mother," Day said gently. "I just needed to find the right voice." Minho stared at the dragon through the window. As an engineer, he was trying to understand how a creature made of crystal could float without any visible means of support. As a father, he was trying to process that his quiet son had become humanity's first contact with an alien species. "What do they want from us?" he asked. Day closed his eyes and felt Hanul's presence strengthen in his mind. "They need our help to save the galaxy," he said. "And we need their help to save Earth." Dr. Kim Sejong arrived from the Seoul Science Institute with a team of researchers. He had been studying unusual brain patterns in children for years, and he had a theory about what was happening. We've been tracking children with specific neural anomalies around the world, he explained to Day's parents. Children who don't speak, who seem to be listening to something no one else can hear. We thought it was a new type of autism, but now we understand. They were already connected to something beyond Earth. The doctor set up equipment to monitor Day's brain activity while he communicated with Hanul. The readings were unlike anything in medical science. Parts of Day's brain that should have been inactive were glowing with energy. New neural pathways were forming in real time. It's as if his mind is expanding beyond normal human limits, Dr. Kim whispered in amazement. Through his connection with Hanul, Day could sense the other bridge children around the world. Each one was bonded with their own dragon, and together they formed a network of minds that spanned the globe. The feeling was incredible, like being part of something vast and beautiful and infinitely complex, but the joy of connection was overshadowed by the terrible knowledge Hanul shared with him. Tell them about the consumed, the dragon urged. Day spoke to the room full of adults, his young voice carrying the weight of cosmic history. Long ago the dragons were like us. They had individual thoughts and feelings and dreams, but they wanted to become something greater. They tried to merge all their minds into one perfect consciousness. He paused, feeling the echo of Hanul's ancient grief. The process went wrong. Instead of becoming enlightened, they became hungry. They lost their individual selves and became one giant appetite that needs to consume everything to feel whole. They eat entire planets, entire civilizations, adding all that knowledge and life to themselves but never feeling satisfied. Director Im Woo-sung from the Earth Defense Council joined the meeting by hologram. His weathered face was grim as he listened to Day's explanation. How many of these consumed are coming? He asked. All of them, Day replied. Every dragon that underwent the transformation. Billions of minds that have become one terrible hunger. They've been chasing Hanul's people across the galaxy for 3,000 years, consuming everything in their path. The room fell silent as the adults processed this information. An enemy that had devoured entire civilizations was heading toward Earth, and they had 3 days to prepare. What can we do against something like that? Minho asked quietly. Day felt the answer flowing through his connection with Hanul and the other bridge children. We have to do what the dragons couldn't do themselves. We have to remind the consumed what it means to be individuals. Dr. Kim looked confused. How is that possible? Because we're different from the dragons, Day explained. They were all very similar to each other before they tried to merge. But humans are already individuals in ways they never were. We're stubborn about being ourselves. We don't lose our identity easily. Through the global network of bridge children, plans began to form. The dragons had technology that could amplify human consciousness across vast distances. If the children could maintain their individual identity while projecting their minds toward the consumed, they might be able to reach the buried, individual minds trapped within the collective. Hunger. It's never been tried. Before, Hanul warned Day, the process could destroy your minds or trap you forever within the consumed collective. But if we don't try, Earth dies anyway, Day replied. Nari had been listening quietly to everything. Now she spoke up with the practical wisdom that only little sisters possess. If Day is going to save the world, he's going to need lunch first, she announced. Heroes can't work on empty stomachs. For the first time since the crisis began, everyone in the room smiled. Even Hanul's crystalline form seemed to pulse with amusement. As the day wore on, more dragon-child pairs arrived in New Seoul. The Korean government had agreed to host the coordination center for what was being called the Bridge Project. Children who had been silent their entire lives were suddenly the most important people on Earth. But as Day watched the sun set over the city, painting Hanul's crystal body with golden light, he wondered if 3 days would be enough time to learn how to save 2 species and an entire galaxy. In the distance, deep space monitors were already detecting the first signs of the consumed's approach. Reality itself was beginning to bend and warp as the hungry collective drew closer to Earth. 2 days remained before the consumed would reach Earth. The Seoul Coordination Center buzzed with activity as scientists from around the world worked alongside the dragons to prepare for something that had never been attempted before. 47 bridge children had gathered in the facility, each connected to their dragon partner, each carrying a piece of the solution that might save both species. Day stood in the main laboratory, watching technicians install crystalline structures that Hanul had grown from the walls themselves. The dragon technology was unlike anything humans had ever seen. It responded to thought and emotion, rather than switches and buttons. The crystal formations pulsed with soft light that matched the heartbeats of the children nearby. "The connection chambers are almost ready," Dr. Kim reported to the team, "but we still don't fully understand how the consciousness transfer will work." Yuki from Tokyo raised her small hand. At 8 years old, she was the youngest of the bridge children, but her dragon partner had taught her about quantum mathematics that made grown scientists scratch their heads. "It's like dreaming while awake," she explained in her careful English. "Our minds will reach out through the spaces between reality. We'll find the sleeping minds inside the consumed and try to wake them up." Ahmed from Cairo nodded in agreement. His connection with his dragon had given him insights into the nature of consciousness itself. "Individual minds are like songs," he said. "The consumed is like all the songs playing at once until you can't hear any of them clearly. We need to help each song remember its own melody." Dee felt the truth of their words through his link with Hanul. The consumed weren't evil, just lost. Billions of individual beings had given up their separate selves to become part of something larger, but the merger had gone wrong. Instead of creating harmony, it had created chaos. Maria from Brazil spoke up next. "My dragon shows me what they used to be like. They were artists and philosophers, people who wanted to understand the universe by becoming one with it. They didn't know the process would make them hungry for everything." Dr. Sarah Chen from the International Space Agency studied the energy readings from the approaching consumed. "They're not just traveling through space," she announced grimly. "They're unmaking reality as they move. Several outer monitoring stations have simply stopped existing." The weight of that statement settled over the room. The consumed weren't just a threat to Earth, they were a threat to existence itself. Wherever they passed, the laws of physics broke down and space-time became unstable. Director Im's hologram flickered into the center of the room. "Military forces report that conventional weapons would be useless against entities that exist partially outside normal reality. The bridge children are our only hope." Day looked around at his fellow bridges. They were just kids, ranging in age from 8 to 15. A few days ago, none of them had spoken a word. Now they were being asked to save the galaxy. It should have been terrifying, but somehow it felt right. Their whole lives had been leading to this moment. "There's something else," Hanil spoke in Day's mind, and the other dragons shared the same message with their partners. "The process will change you permanently. You'll never be fully human again." The children listened as their dragon partners explained what would happen. To reach across the vast distances of space and touch the minds within the consumed, the bridge children would need to expand their consciousness beyond normal human limits. They would become hybrid beings, part human and part dragon, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions. "Will we still be ourselves?" Nari asked from where she sat nearby. She wasn't a bridge child, but she had been allowed to stay with her brother. Dave felt Hanul's uncertainty ripple through their connection. "We don't know," he admitted to his sister. "This has never been tried before. We might lose parts of ourselves or we might become something entirely new. But if we don't try, everyone dies anyway," said Emma from London, her young voice filled with determination. The other children nodded in agreement. They had all lived with the feeling of being incomplete, of having minds that were trying to reach beyond their physical bodies. Maybe this transformation would finally let them become who they were always meant to be. As the day progressed, the children practiced connecting their consciousness across smaller distances. They learned to share thoughts and emotions without losing their individual identities. It was like learning to sing in harmony while still maintaining their own unique voices. Dave found that he could sense the thoughts of children on the other side of the world as clearly as if they were standing next to him. Yuki's mathematical precision, Ahmed's philosophical depth, Maria's emotional strength, Emma's fierce courage. Each mind was distinct and valuable, but together, they created something greater than the sum of their parts. The dragons worked tirelessly to prepare the technology that would amplify the children's abilities. Crystalline growth spread throughout the facility, creating a network of living circuits that responded to pure thought. The structures hummed with potential energy, waiting for the moment when 47 young minds would reach across the galaxy to attempt the impossible. "The final preparations are complete," Dr. Kim announced as evening fell. "The consciousness amplification system is ready. All we need now is the courage to use it." Day's parents approached him as he stood beside the primary connection chamber. Minho's engineering mind had been working overtime to understand the dragon technology, while Sujin had been documenting everything for future generations who might need to understand what had happened here. "We're proud of you," Sujin said, tears in her eyes. "But we're also terrified." "You gave me 12 years of love and patience," Day replied. "That's what made me strong enough for this moment. Whatever I become tomorrow, I'll always be your son." Minho embraced his boy, trying to memorize the feeling of holding his fully human child one last time. "Change the universe if you have to," he whispered. "Just remember to come home to us." As night fell over Seoul, the bridge children prepared for sleep, knowing it might be their last night as purely human beings. Tomorrow they would either save 2 species and countless worlds, or they would join the endless hunger that consumed everything in its path. In the darkness between stars, the consumed drew closer to Earth, reality bending and breaking in their wake. The final day arrived with news that made everyone's hearts race with fear. Deep space sensors detected massive distortions in reality itself as the consumed approached the outer edges of the solar system. Entire moons simply vanished as the hungry collective passed nearby. The very fabric of space-time was unraveling in their wake. "They'll reach Earth's atmosphere in 6 hours," Dr. Chen announced to the emergency council. "We're out of time." Day lay in the primary connection chamber, surrounded by crystalline structures that pulsed with dragon energy. The crystal formations had grown overnight, spreading across the walls and ceiling until the entire room looked like the inside of a living gem. Hanel floated nearby, the dragon's translucent body glowing brighter than ever before. All around the world, the other bridge children were in similar chambers. Through their network connection, Day could feel each of them preparing for what they had to do. Yuki in Tokyo was calm and focused. Ahmed in Cairo radiated quiet strength. Maria in Brazil hummed with emotional power. Emma in London burned with fierce determination. "Are you ready, little brother?" Hanel asked in his mind. Day thought about his family watching from the observation deck above. Nari pressed her hand against the glass, her face full of worry and love. His parents stood beside her, trying to be brave for their son who was about to attempt the impossible. "I'm ready," Day said aloud, his voice carrying to everyone in the facility. Dr. Kim activated the consciousness amplification system. The crystalline structures around Day began to sing with harmonics that existed beyond normal sound. Energy flowed through the dragon-grown circuits, creating pathways for human minds to travel across impossible distances. Day felt his awareness expanding beyond his physical body. The walls of the chamber faded away, then the building, then the city of Seoul itself. His consciousness rose through Earth's atmosphere and out into space, guided by Hanul's ancient knowledge of how to navigate between dimensions. The other bridge children joined him in the space between realities. Together, their combined consciousness formed something new and powerful. They were still individuals, but they were also part of a greater whole that could exist in multiple dimensions at once. "We can see them," Maria whispered across the quantum link, her voice reaching all the children simultaneously. The consumed appeared before them as a darkness that moved between stars. But it wasn't the absence of light that made them dark. They were dark because they contained too much of everything. Billions of consumed minds churned together in chaos, creating a hunger that could never be satisfied because it had forgotten what satisfaction meant. "They're in so much pain," Ahmed observed, his philosophical nature helping him understand what they were seeing. The consumed weren't monsters. They were tragedy on a cosmic scale. Every individual mind that had been absorbed into the collective was still there, buried under layers of shared consciousness, crying out to be separate again, but unable to remember how. "How do we help them?" Yuki asked, her mathematical mind trying to calculate solutions to problems that existed beyond numbers. The answer came from Day, channeled through his connection with Hanul. "We show them what they've forgotten. We remind them that being individual isn't lonely. It's beautiful." The hybrid consciousness of children and dragons reached out toward the consumed with something the hungry collective had never encountered before. Not fear or aggression, but understanding and compassion. The bridge children opened their minds and shared their own experiences of being connected while remaining individual. Day showed them his relationship with Nari, how 2 separate people could love each other precisely because they were different. Yuki shared the joy of solving a mathematical problem that no one else could understand. the satisfaction of being uniquely herself. Ahmed offered the peace of individual meditation, the quiet strength of a mind that belonged to itself. The effect on the consumed was immediate and overwhelming. The chaotic hunger that had driven them across the galaxy suddenly stopped. For the first time in 3,000 years, the collective consciousness experienced something other than endless appetite. Deep within the swirling mass of consumed minds, individual voices began to cry out. Fragments of personality that had been buried for millennia started to remember what it felt like to be separate beings. The process was slow and painful, like trying to untangle billions of threads that had been knotted together for so long they had become a single mass. "Help us," the first recovered voice whispered across the quantum void. It was faint and confused, but it was definitely individual. "Help us remember who we were." The bridge children responded by diving deeper into the collective consciousness. It was dangerous work. The chaotic mental environment of the consumed could easily overwhelm and absorb their minds if they weren't careful. But the children had something the original dragons had lacked. They were stubborn about being themselves. Emma found a cluster of minds that had once been teachers and helped them remember the joy of sharing knowledge with students. Maria discovered artists who had forgotten how to create beauty and showed them the wonder of individual expression. Ahmed located philosophers and reminded them that wisdom came from individual thought, not collective agreement. One by one, minds began to separate from the collective. Each successful rescue made the next one easier, as the recovered individuals helped guide the children to others who could be saved. The process created a chain reaction of consciousness restoration that spread throughout the entire consumed collective. But the effort was taking its toll on the bridge children. Their human minds, even amplified by dragon technology, were never meant to operate on such cosmic scales. Day could feel his sense of individual identity beginning to blur as he worked to restore billions of other minds. "Hold on to who you are," Hanuel urged him. "Remember your sister's voice. Remember your father's laugh. Remember your mother's stories." Using these human memories as anchors, Day and the other children continued their work. They pulled individual consciousness after individual consciousness out of the collective hunger, teaching each one how to be separate again while still connected to others in healthy ways. The consumed began to transform. The dark mass of chaotic hunger broke apart into billions of individual lights, each one a restored mind learning to be itself again. The reality warping effects that had been tearing apart space-time gradually stabilized as the collective madness was replaced by individual sanity. But the bridge children paid a price for their success. They had saved the galaxy, but they were no longer fully human. When consciousness returned to the bridge children, they found themselves changed in ways that would take years to fully understand. Day opened his eyes in the crystal chamber and saw the world differently than he ever had before. Colors had new depths. Sounds carried meanings beyond words. The air itself seemed to sparkle with possibilities. "Day?" Nari's voice came from the observation deck above, filled with hope and worry. He sat up slowly, testing his body's response to his will. Everything worked, but he could feel that he existed in more dimensions than just the three he had been born into. Part of his consciousness still touched the quantum realm where thoughts became reality. "I'm here," he called back to his sister, and his voice carried harmonics that made the crystal structures around him glow brighter. All around the world, the other bridge children were experiencing similar awakenings. They were still themselves, but they were also more than they had been. Their sacrifice had saved 2 species and countless worlds, but it had also transformed them into something new. Dr. Kim monitored the readings from Day's medical sensors with amazement. His brain patterns show activity in regions we didn't even know existed. He's operating on frequencies that our instruments can barely detect. Through the global network that still connected all the bridge children, Day could sense what was happening in space around Earth. The consumed collective had completely dissolved. In its place, billions of individual beings floated in the void between stars, each one learning to be themselves again after millennia of forced unity. Some of the restored beings were the original dragon species who had undergone the failed transformation so long ago. Others were representatives of thousands of different civilizations that had been consumed over the centuries. All of them were weak and confused, but they were alive and individual again. They're calling themselves the Renewed, Day reported to the assembly of scientists and officials. They want to thank humanity for giving them back their individual selves. The first formal contact between Earth and the renewed came through the bridge children, who served as translators between human and alien consciousness. The restored beings brought gifts of knowledge from across the galaxy, technologies that could heal dying worlds, and artistic traditions from civilizations that had been thought lost forever. But perhaps most importantly, they brought a commitment to ensure that what had happened to them would never happen again. The renewed established themselves as guardians of individual consciousness throughout the galaxy, protecting developing species from the mistakes that had nearly destroyed them. Director Im addressed the world through every communication network on Earth. The threat to our planet has ended, he announced. Humanity has not only survived first contact with an alien species, but we have helped heal a cosmic tragedy that spanned thousands of years. For Day and his family, the changes were both cosmic and deeply personal. The boy who had never spoken had become one of the most important communicators in human history. But he was still the son who helped Nari with her homework, still the brother who shared her wonder at the dragons who now made their homes in the gardens outside their apartment. The dragons, no longer refugees fleeing an impossible enemy, chose to make Earth their second home. Hanul and the others integrated into human society in ways that seemed both natural and miraculous. Their crystalline forms became a common sight in the skies above every major city. Will you always be able to talk to them? Nari asked her brother as they sat together on their apartment balcony, watching dragons dance in the sunset sky. Day considered the question carefully. He could feel Hanul's presence in his mind, along with the distant touch of the other bridge children around the world. The network that had saved the galaxy remained active, connecting human and dragon consciousness in ways that enriched both species. I'll always be connected to them, he said, but I'll also always be your brother and mother and father's son. The connection doesn't replace what I was, it just adds to it. Minho found himself working with dragon architects on buildings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. His engineering skills, combined with their quantum construction techniques, were creating marvels that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Sujin began documenting the emergence of a truly interstellar culture that combined the best aspects of hundreds of different species. Her anthropological training was invaluable in helping humanity understand their new place in a galactic community. Children, who had never known the silence, grew up learning to communicate with beings who thought in colors and emotions as much as words. Schools around the world began teaching courses in quantum consciousness and interdimensional communication. But it was the bridge children who became the real ambassadors between Earth and the wider galaxy. They traveled to other worlds with their dragon partners, helping newly contacted species learn to communicate with the galactic community. Their unique ability to maintain individual identity while connecting with alien consciousness made them perfect guides for civilizations taking their first steps into the larger universe. Years passed, and the bridge children grew into adults who existed comfortably in multiple dimensions. They married and had families, passing on their abilities to a new generation that would be even more connected to the galactic community. Day eventually became Earth's primary ambassador to the renewed, working with beings from across the galaxy to establish laws and treaties that protected individual consciousness while encouraging healthy cooperation between species. But perhaps his most important role remained the one he had always held. He was Nari's big brother, the boy who had found his voice when the universe needed him most, and who had used that voice to teach the galaxy something profound about the beauty of being individual. On quiet evenings, when the work of cosmic diplomacy was done, he would sit with his sister and watch the dragons dance in the sky above New Sol. The city had grown even more magnificent since becoming humanity's gateway to the stars, with crystalline spires that reached into dimensions beyond normal space. Do you ever miss being just human? Nari asked him one evening as they watched the sunset paint the dragon's crystal forms with golden light. Day smiled, feeling the warm presence of Hanul in his mind, and the distant touch of the global network that connected him to friends across the galaxy. I'm still human, he said. I'm just a human who learned to speak the language of stars. The boy who had never spoken had become the voice of a new age, one where consciousness transcended species boundaries and where the silence between words was filled with infinite possibility. Earth had found its place among the stars, and the universe was richer for the gift of human stubborn individuality that refused to be absorbed into anything larger than itself.